taking this kind of algorithm that wants us to be angry, it wants us to pay attention, it wants us to be enraged and violent because that's what performs best.
I've been seeing these videos, all based off this old horror movie called Faces of Death.
First of all, congratulations on this film. What I like so much about this setup is you're not just trying to remake something infamous. You're kind of asking what the Faces of Death means now in a world where horrifying images are instant. And listen, people still don't know what's real. But I want to talk about Margot because she has such an interesting emotional foundation because of the trauma is so specific with her. How early did that backstory with their sister become the core of the character for the both of you?
I think pretty early on, I think we're really interested in telling stories about characters who have complicated relationships with the internet.
Sure.
In our first film, it's also about a character who kind of has her agency ripped away from her. It's kind of out of her control. And the way that the internet can kind of run away with something is a huge touchstone for Margot as well.
Awesome. Now, the original film's whole identity was built around people asking, "Is this real?" What felt exciting? What felt exciting for you guys to update that question for the internet era, especially instead of the VHS era? That one's for you, Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing is that we are constantly faced with this question of like, is this real or is this not real? In fact, way more so than we used to be faced with this question back in the 70s, right? Like, every time we see a piece of media now, we have to kind of question, like, is this AI? Was this created? Was this staged? Is this fake? And I think that like, there's it's psychotic. It makes the modern experience like very, very, very destabilizing in terms of our own connection to reality. And I think that and I think that that was kind of like the core of the idea of making a movie about Faces of Death, is that Faces of Death used to be this thing that was impossible to get your hands on, and now Faces of Death is everywhere. And the questions around Faces of Death that we used to ask, those questions are also pervasive in contemporary life.
Absolutely. Now, Isa, for Margot, making her a content creator is such a sharp choice. Why did that feel like the right way into this version of the story?
Yeah, I think content moderation was something Danny and I had talked about a lot. He had briefly worked as a content moderator after college, and it was just a space that we found very interesting. And I think when we first conceptualized Faces of Death, we thought about having a killer who's recreating the film and putting it online, and it just seemed to pair perfectly with this desire to explore content moderation that we had always had. And so we just kind of put them together, and it really created a strong narrative backbone for this film.
What I find really compelling is that Margot survives this horrifying public death and then seems to spend her life trying not to be seen, while the killer is turning death into something visible and shareable. Was that contrast always central for the movie for you guys?
I mean, the whole film is structured around the kind of duality of these two characters,
Sure.
Basically for the whole beginning of the movie, we only cut between them through these match cuts. Like we first go from Margot to Arthur through the mirror, and then, we go from Margot to Arthur then in a match cut when she's, looking at like she's looking at him and he's looking at his next victim. And then ultimately, the next time they come together is in this split screen sequence. And now they're finally sharing a frame together, but they're separated. And then they finally collide in the film when they're brought together in this oneer. And so for us, like, it was absolutely, seeing this kind of duality of this kind of offline person, this person who's trying to cleanse the internet, this person who's trying to poison the internet, and then ultimately at the end of the film, the only way that she can prove her point is by posting a piece of snuff film again. And in a sense, that's what Arthur finds so funny is that she has become him. She has kind of proven his ultimate point, and I think that's yeah. Maybe that's too spoilery. I'm
Yeah,
now
I'll be
realizing.
sure. I will definitely be sure to hold that as more of like the explainer because I feel like that. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a. I honestly feel like that's the brilliance of this movie is exactly what you just said. Especially a lot of remakes update films on the surface level. This feels like it's really updating the anxiety. What did you feel like the modern version of fear for the Faces of Death had to be? And that's for either of you.
I think I think it's as I said, like it's that faces of death is everywhere. Like that's the scariest idea in the movie, right? Like, and then there's other things that are scary about the film. There's, the lack of privacy that we have online. There's the disruption of our sense of identities. And then there's also just like how terrifying it is to wake up trapped in a cage in someone's basement and have to figure out how to escape. That is also very scary. But I think that we wanted the movie to kind of service the scares from the conceptual to the corporal
Caporal.
corporeal corporal.
Isa, for you, I feel like Arthur, not just murdering people, but he's recreating these deaths and posting them online. What did that let you explore about the internet turning violence into spectacle and content?
I think the thing about Arthur doing this is that no one's going to find it surprising. No one that we've shown the film to is like, I don't believe that. Everyone's like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And I think for me, that's a part of the internet that I've always kind of been fascinated by and wanted to explore. I think in these conversations with Danny about building out this killer and building out his motive, it just seems so obvious to us that, taking this kind of algorithm that wants us to be angry, it wants us to pay attention, it wants us to be enraged and violent because that's what performs best. Of course, taking a character to that extreme is going to be someone like Arthur. And so I think that for us was like an incredibly intense exploration.
Daniel, I want to ask about Dacre and Barbie because they are phenomenal in this film. And I've seen Dacre in so many other things, but man, he is terrifying in this movie. But can you talk to me about working with them as collaborators on this film?
Yeah, I mean, what I loved about both Dacre and Barbie and the collaboration in this film is like they both really wanted to find a personal connection to their character. They were always striving to kind of like where do I find myself with this person? How do I connect, individually? And so, with Barbie, I think it was like being a person who grew up in the same kind of depths and dark places on the internet that we did, and also who I think, has been able to experience both the glorious things the internet have to offer, but also the kind of like terrors that come along with having your identity ripped away from you. And with Dacre, I think, he really connected to Arthur's sense of obsession and alienation, obviously not from the perspective of a serial killer, but from the perspective of an actor and a performer. And I think, a lot of the process with him was about finding those places of personal connection and figuring out how they could be expressed through somebody who is a psychopath in the way that Arthur is.
Isa, for you, when you're writing someone like Margot, how much of it comes from her grief and how much of it comes from her guilt? Because surviving something that awful with her sister feels like it could be the kind of thing that permanently changes how somebody moves through the world.
Yeah, I think when we meet Margot, she's absolutely someone who is just completely consumed by this sense of loss. And she's someone who has kind of neglected her life, her social life. She doesn't go out anymore. All she kind of does is do this job that she also like deeply believes in. It can maybe give her some type of redemption, And so she's looking for a way to redeem herself because of her guilt. And it is through that she ultimately like starts engaging in this journey, right? She's driven by both, I think, ultimately.
Now, last question I have for the both of you. If you guys have kind of played in this space before with Cam, with identity, performance, and technology, did Faces of Death feel like a continuation of those ideas, just more in a brutal, more confrontational type of way?
Yeah, I think so. I think that like we the subject matter I think was really what lent it to I think be more brutal and confrontational. I think like Cam was a little bit more about identity and about sex, and Faces of Death is more explicitly about violence, and so that just naturally kind of that naturally amplifies.
Amazing. I actually do have one more question because I wanted to talk a little bit about Margot's job because it doesn't just feel like ironic. It feels kind of tragic because she's built this life where she can never really escape these traumatic images. Can you talk about her as a content manager? I think it's actually quite a brilliant way into this world.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I think that she's someone who, is driven, like I said, by this sense of wanting redemption, wanting to make up for what she did, and also believes that she can maybe help. And I think ultimately her realization that this system is actually not helping her, and her kind of disillusionment with this sense of safety that she's trying to create for herself is ultimately kind of a coming of age story. It's like the story is about Margot kind of waking up and realizing that she has to do things for herself.
I can't wait for people to see this movie. I loved it. It was fantastic. I want to thank you guys so much for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great to meet you.
You too. Take
Thank you.
care.
Great to meet you.